There's a fantasy a lot of people have when they get into real estate, and I had it too. It's the lone wolf thing. You against the market. Just you, your spreadsheet, your grit, and eventually a garage full of luxury cars and a podcast where you tell everyone how you did it by yourself. It's a great fantasy. It's also how a lot of people end up sitting alone in a room at month 7, talking themselves out of the whole thing, with nobody around to tell them they're being insane. I've watched the solo route up close, mine and other people's. And the people who actually made it through the rough early part almost never did it alone. Not because they couldn't do the work solo, a lot of them could, and probably do it better, but because doing it solo meant there was nobody there for the part that actually breaks people, and it's never the part that you would guess. That's what I would like to talk about. Why the people around you end up mattering more than the strategy, and why, quote, I'll just figure it out myself is one of the most expensive plans you can make. Let's go. When people imagine quitting real estate, they picture some dramatic blowup, a deal that craters, a flip that turns into a money pit, a tenant who turns the place into a big crime scene, big cinematic failure. Well, that's almost never how it goes. The way people actually quit is much dumber and much quieter. They get a little confused, they get a little discouraged, and they stall, and then a few weeks go by where they didn't do anything, and the not doing anything becomes the new normal, and then one day they realize they're just not doing anymore, and they never formally decided to stop. It kind of just evaporated. And the reason that happens is almost always they were alone in it. When you're alone, a small setback and a fatal setback feel exactly the same because there's no one to tell you which one you're looking at. You hit a snag you've never seen before. You don't know if it's a Tuesday problem or an end of the road problem, and with nobody to ask, your brain helplessly assumes the worst, and you lose a week to dread over something a much more experienced person would have solved in a 10-minute phone call. I've done this. I've spent days spiraling over something that turned out to be completely routine, the kind of thing anyone who'd done it twice would have waved off. The problem wasn't the problem. The problem was I didn't have anyone to say, oh, yeah, that. Here's what you do. So when people say community matters, this is the boring real reason, and it's got nothing to do with networking events or business cards. A good group does three pretty unglamorous things. The first is they tell you what's normal. Most of the panic in early real estate comes from not knowing whether what you're experiencing is fine. Is this delay normal? Is this contractor being weird or being criminal? Is this number bad, or is it just how it looks? When you've got people a few steps ahead of you, you get to borrow their sense of normal until you build your own, and that alone prevents about half the quitting. The second they catch you before you do something dumb. Everybody gets seduced by a bad deal eventually. It happens to smart people constantly because a bad deal that you're emotionally attached to looks identical to a good deal from the inside. You need somebody outside your own head who can look at it without all the stars in their eyes and go, walk me through why you think this works, and watch you fail to answer. That one sentence has saved more money than any course ever has. And the third thing, which sounds soft but isn't, is they keep you in the chair. Most of this game is just continuing to show up after the initial excitement wears off. And it's a lot harder to ghost on something when there are people who notice you went quiet. Not in a guilt trip way, more that knowing someone's going to ask how the thing went makes you actually do the thing so you've got an answer. Now, on the flip side, because most, quote, join my community pitches skip this part, a bad group is worse than no group, there are real estate communities that are basically a room full of people giving each other advice that none of them have actually tested. Everyone's an expert, nobody's done a deal, and it's just confidence bouncing off confidence until somebody loses money. You can actually walk out of a place like that more confused than you walked in and more sure of yourself, which is the dangerous combination. There's also the type that's secretly a sales funnel wearing a community costume. You think you joined a group of peers, and it turns out you joined an audience, and every conversation gently roots towards buying the next thing. You can usually smell these. If the, quote, community has one guru at the center, and everyone else is a fan, that's not a community. That's a fan club with a membership fee. And then there's the most common failure, which isn't malicious at all. It's just a pile of people with nothing in common except the word real estate. A guy flipping houses in Ohio, and a woman doing passive syndications in Arizona, and somebody trying to break into private lending, all in one chat, all giving each other advice that doesn't transfer. They're all well meaning. None of it lands because they're playing different games, and the advice for one game is noise for another. A group's only worth anything if the people in it can actually see your situation clearly, which is a harder bar than it sounds. So the question really isn't, should I find a community? It's, who specifically do I want around me? And that's where it gets interesting. The instinct is to surround yourself with people just like you. It feels good. Somebody who thinks the way you think, agrees with your reads, validates your gut. The problem is that a room of people exactly like you also shares all of your blind spots. If you're the type who moves too fast, a room of fast movers will cheer you straight off a cliff. If you're the type who overthinks everything, a room of overthinkers will help you analyze a deal until it's gone. The people who are actually useful to you are the ones who annoy you a little. The careful one drives the aggressive one nuts, and the aggressive one stresses out the careful one, and that friction is the entire point. One person's foot is on the gas, the other's hovering over the brake, and between the two of them, the car ends up going the right speed. Two gas pedals crash, two brakes never leave the driveway. You want the person whose instincts are the opposite of yours close enough to argue with. The best partnerships I've seen kind of look like a low grade ongoing argument that also happen to make money. They are not the people who can finish each other's sentences. They're the people who keep each other from doing the stupid thing they're each individually prone to. And you almost never pick that person on vibes, because on vibes, you'll always pick somebody like you because that's who's comfortable. Here's the part that actually changed how I think about this. Most of the value of a group is wasted at the start figuring out who everybody is. You spend months slowly working out that this person actually knows their stuff, that person talks a big game, and that this one's reliable, and that one disappears when things get hard. It's like every networking event ever. A lot of standing around guessing who's worth talking to, and usually guessing wrong because the loudest person in the room is rarely the one who's actually done anything. Imagine skipping all of that, walking into a room where you already know how everyone's wired before they open their mouth. You know who the careful capital types are, who the fast moving deal junkies are, who's built for the slow patient stuff. You know who would make a good partner for you specifically and who would be a disaster. And you know on day one, instead of finding it out the expensive way 18 months in. That's a genuinely different experience of community. The whole idea is that everyone shows up already knowing their own type and everyone else's, so the months of figuring each other out just don't happen. You skip straight to the useful part, and it's why as a developer we built what we built at Rena. I'll leave it at that because this video isn't about that topic, but it is a video about why the people around you matter in the first place. The lone wolf thing makes for a good story, but I've never met the wolf. Every person I know who got somewhere in this had a handful of people around them doing the unglamorous stuff, telling them what's normal, talking them out of bad deals, noticing when they went quiet, and arguing with them just enough to keep them from driving off of a cliff. It's not the inspiring version. Nobody puts, quote, "I had a few people who'd answer the phone," on a motivational poster, but it's the part that actually keeps people in the game long enough to get good, and getting good is mostly just not quitting before the math has had time to work. So if you're trying to do this completely alone, I'd reconsider. Not because you can't do the work, but because the work was never the part that breaks people. And as they say, you go fast on your own and far with others. If you want to find people who are actually built to complement how you operate instead of just clapping for you, there's a free quiz in the description that'll at least tell you your own type to start with. Decent first step. That's the one. See you next time.